This video is not about rotary cutting. I do recommend that you use a rotary cutter when you're cutting your fabric for a quilt, and I have lots of other videos linked in the description down below that talk about how to use a rotary cutter safely and accurately. This video is for you if you're a brand new quilter and you have bought all the fabric for your quilt, just as the pattern tells you, and you've opened up the rest of your pattern, and now the next step is something to do with a chart like this. If you've never cut fabric for a quilt, it can start to seem a little stressful. And I can tell you the three most important things to do to make quilting fun and enjoyable instead of stressful is to one, know what you're doing and why, two, to take your time, and three, to stay organized. So let's see how those three things apply to cutting fabric for your quilt. First, let's talk about fabric. Fabric is sold on bolts in the store, but how does it get on these bolts? And how does that affect how we're cutting for our quilt? Fabric is made in long strips on giant rolls, and it goes through machines this way. It feeds through giant machines, both the weaving and then the printing and any other treatment. It's going through machines like this. These edges, as you can imagine, probably get a lot of wear and tear. The fabric needs to be stronger on these edges because they're exposed as it's running through the machine. So when the fabric is manufactured, the edges along these two sides are woven a little tighter so that they don't ravel, and also often the printing doesn't go all the way to the edge. Both of these edges are selvage edges. And these edges like this are along the sides of the fabric. So the width of the fabric is from selvage to selvage, and the length of the fabric can be any length of fabric because it's on big giant rolls. Different types of fabric come in different widths because they're woven on different machines and go through different machines. Quilting fabric usually is about 40 inches wide from selvage to selvage. Another common fabric width in quilting is 108 inches wide, so much, much wider. And that's woven and printed especially to use for the backs of quilts so you don't have seams in the backs of your quilt. But for the fabric that you're cutting up to piece the front of your quilt, it's probably 40 inches from selvage to selvage. So now when it's done being manufactured, they cut it into very long lengths, usually about 8 yards, and they put them on the bolts like this. So you can see the two selvage edges ended up here next to each other. When you buy the fabric for your quilt, there's usually a chart in the pattern that tells you how much yardage of each of the different fabrics you need. So when you go to buy this fabric, say that your chart said you needed 1 yard of this, it's going to be measured from this end along the length. So a yard would be 36 inches. They'd measure 36 inches and then cut it off like that. So you'd have your yard of fabric, which would be 36 inches this way, and then 40 inches from selvage to selvage. A pattern will often tell you how wide your fabric needs to be from selvage to selvage because they're expecting a certain amount of fabric when they tell you you need to buy a yard of fabric. So it's important to look in your pattern and see what it says. It usually says about 40 inches. And if you're wondering about your fabric, when you're buying it, it usually says somewhere on the end on the label how wide that fabric is. When you cut fabric for quilt, you usually start by cutting strips from a selvage to selvage or across the width of the fabric. And patterns will specify that as WOF or width of fabric. So you're going to cut big long strips like this across each piece of fabric, and then each strip you're going to cut into smaller pieces. I'll show you this on some actual size fabric. Here's a piece of fabric. The length of fabric is not very long. It's maybe about a quarter of a yard this way, but then it's long this way across the width of the fabric. To make it more efficient to cut, we're going to fold the fabric. just like this, fold it in half, match up those selvedges together. And again, I have lots of videos about rotary cutting. Lots of people now cut the fabric like this after having it folded once. You can line up your ruler and then cut, but I like to use shorter rulers for shorter cuts, so I actually fold it twice. So now when I cut a strip off of this fabric, I'm going to cut it this way and cut a long strip, and it will be a strip of fabric that goes from selvage to selvage. The one thing I'm going to say about rotary cutting in this video is about how to make sure you don't get crooked strips. If you want straight strips, you have to cut square to the fold. If you don't cut a square to the fold, like in this case, this is a folded piece like what I have underneath here in the pink, you can see that this fold is not square to the cut, and neither is this fold. So when you open it up, you get lots of elbows. So check out my other videos about rotary cutting so that you get nice straight strips, because that is important for the cutting process. So now you understand about the fabric and how we're cutting it. Again, we're going to cut strips out of the fabric, and then we're going to cut each strip into smaller pieces. Let's look at that chart again and see how we can stay organized. All cutting instructions are slightly different, but the general process is to cut things into strips and then subcut those strips into smaller pieces. You can see here that this chart says to cut one strip that's 3.5 inches wide, and then you're going to take that strip and cut it into 4 longer rectangles and 2 squares. And these pieces are then assigned a number. Knowing what number each of the pieces are is how you stay organized. A lot of patterns come with labels that you can cut out, and then you can put these labels on top of the stacks of your pieces as you cut them to help stay organized. Even if your pattern does not come with cute little labels like that, do just cut out little pieces of fabric, tear them off, or use masking tape and label your pieces as you cut. I'll show you as we go along. The first step I would do when I see a chart like this is to identify what these fabrics are. So we're going to start with fabric A, and we're going to say that this is going to be the pink solid. And you will know because you bought the right amount of yardage for this fabric A in your buying chart. And then I would go through all the fabrics that I had for the quilt and put them all here. You may think this is overkill, but you do not want to be wondering later what it was that you were doing. It just makes life a lot less stressful if you stay organized and know exactly what everything is. And we'll say this one is the pink polka dot. I'm not going to cut all of these things, but I'm going to show you the general gist so that you know how to stay calm and organized and have a good time while you're cutting. I do all this labeling and organizing because so many times I get pulled away from doing my quilting in the middle of something, and then when I come back, I might not remember what was happening. It could be a week later that I come back, and how am I going to know where I was? So let me show you how I do it. We'll walk through this first one where we're cutting one 3.5-inch strip and then subcutting these. Some people like to cut all their strips first and then do all the subcutting. And some people like to cut a strip and then subcut it and then cut a strip and then subcut it. You can do it either way, whichever makes sense for you. But after you cut something, make sure you check it off on the chart. So first strip, 3.5 inches. I measured my 3.5 inches and I'm going to cut my strip. And then I'm really going to go over here and say, yep, I cut that strip. Now let's do the subcutting. Let's start with the 3.5 by 6.5. Now you know you cut a 3.5-inch strip. So you're going to cut the 6.5-inch part. I've only unfolded once, so this is a layer of 2. And I'm cutting this a little bit longer on the first one so that I can turn it around and trim off the selvedges. So I've lined up here and here so that my cut will be square. And I'm just going to flip this around and actually cut it to the 6.5 inches. And again, I'm lining up and lining up, cutting off my selvedges. So that's 2. We need 4, so I'm going to cut one more set of 2. And then I'm going to do the fact that it's unit 1. So I'm going to put my little unit 1 label on it, and I'm going to check off that I did that here. Now, if I suddenly get pulled away, I know exactly what I've done and everything's labeled. Let's cut the other one that we need to cut off this strip. We need 2 3.5-inch squares. So this again is a layer of 2. So I just need to go here. I now have 2 3.5-inch squares. They are unit 2. We'll put the little unit 2 on there, that pile, and we'll check off that we did it. And that is truly as easy as it is. It's easy if you stay organized. If you start flinging things around and doing things out of order, then you're going to get stressed. So just calmly, just do one thing at a time. So I would cut all of the fabric A and then all of the fabric B. And then if you notice down here, this cutting is very similar to this, and you're making the same units, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. As you cut them, you're just going to add them to the pile with your other pieces that you've already cut of that unit. Later, when you start sewing, the pattern will probably say, take unit 1 of fabric A and unit 1 of fabric C and put them together, and you'll be able to find them because you have this labeled. You know what fabrics are what. This is ABC. You know what the different fabrics are according to your quilt, and then you'll know what unit they are because they're labeled. It just makes things so much easier to stay organized like this, and it's not a big deal. Just don't expect to get it done in an instant and you'll be happy. There's 2 more things I want to mention about cutting to make things easy and to not have any disasters. And the first one is about fat quarters. When a pattern tells you to cut things from fat quarters, it often tells you how to lay it out like this one does here. And you can see that a fat quarter is 18 inches by 20 inches. Just pay attention to what you're cutting and the orientation of the fat quarter. Usually there's plenty of extra fabric when people are using fat quarters, but not always. So just follow the directions and make sure your fat quarter is oriented the way the pattern specifies. The last thing I want to mention is sometimes a pattern will say cut a square in half once diagonally or to cut a square in half twice diagonally. All this means is just like this, once diagonally and twice diagonally. I'll show you with a couple squares right here. Here are 2 squares. I'm going to cut 1 in half once diagonally. Just like that. And this is a bias edge now, so be careful when you're stacking these, don't stretch them. And then if you cut twice diagonally, it helps if you keep the square on the table just like this. So cut it, don't move those. And cut the other way, and then you can move them and stack them up and label them. I hope this video helped you feel really clear and comfortable about what you're doing, and hopefully also it reminded you to take your time and be organized, because I really want you to be happy sewing. Make sure you check out the description for more videos about rotary cutting safety and accuracy, because those are both important to quilting as well. Have a good day.